Hello, and welcome to my Elden Ring Nightreign update. In this video, I'll just jump right into the code and talk about a lot of the cool things that I did. Some things might be repeated from the last video, but a lot of it will be new. This is just in case people are joining in on this amazing journey just now. I'm really excited, so again, let's just jump right into it. There are 5 main parts to this video: the stats, the classes, the status effects, the sites of grace, and everything else which I call extra. I'm going to break extra into 2 parts, the first part and the last part. So let's start with that one. I've first made a pretty simple linear and modular interaction system. Anything with the interface will be able to be interacted with since I made a blueprint interface. If there are multiple overlapping factors, I'll be honest, I have no idea what the priority is like for interaction. I assume it's the first one that's triggered when entering the trigger box. However, to showcase something basic and simple, it was good enough. And more complex interaction systems are there, but this is something extremely basic. So let's get into these stats. The stats are distinguished into 2 different categories: the main stats and the secondary stats. There are 8 main stats and the game calls them attributes, so naturally, I call them attributes. I then made a structure to hold the main values, like so. I then made a mat variable, sort of combining the 2 together, and I was like, this is beyond science. Afterwards, I did the same thing with the secondary stats. The secondary stats are scaled and pulled from the main stats. Now, I don't know the exact scaling, so I just left that up to the calculations and called it good. Now that I have my base and secondary stats, it's time I put that in the main HUD. I did my best to copy this main HUD right here, so I made a progress bar for HP, FP, and stamina, but the secondary stats only held a max HP, FP, and stamina. I needed to get the current values. I decided to make simple float values for these things, since I imagine I'll be manipulating them a lot, and it would be easy to do that. Also, there's only 3 of them, so it wasn't too much of a difficulty for me to do that. I did all of my setup to make sure that the key bindings are correct and went from there. But now that my UI is good, I want to make different classes for the player to play as. I have stats, I have the UI, so why not start with classes? Now, before I talked about using data tables, so I decided to go with that. So I hopped back into the research phase again and looked through it, trying to find the best way to go about doing that. Each class has something different and unique to offer in their character skills, ultimate abilities, and most importantly, their stats. But those are the very things they had in common: skills, abilities, and stats. So researching the game made me realize that the main stat upgrades are very much documented and researched. Wilder's upgrades are right here in this website and this website. And Guardians is also here in this website and this website. So there were 2 options: either find a formula to find the scaling values or just hard code the values. As the game caps at the level at 15, I decided to hard code the values in these data tables. This was fairly simple and it was really easy. In another data table, I would hold all the information about the classes as Nightreign does in the character selection screen. This way, adding a new class was not obtrusive at all and can be done fairly simply and easily. A lot of documentation maybe has to be put into it, but that's something as a designer I love to do. Next is updating the player level. As I named the rows and the specific levels, this was fairly simple for me to just grab the level number that I needed. Now, as you can see here, the organization of the data tables goes level 1, level 2, level 3. So all I needed was just to append the 2 and voila, I got it. However, I set my class in the Roundtable Hold and I have to carry that value over to the main level, that value being my class. So I made a game instance and held it in the data table variable type and went from there. I also made a boss selection screen that just sets the boss and held that variable type in the game instance as well. This is something that will be done later on, maybe in the future iteration, but the boss isn't something I'm super concerned about right now since we're not really making and prototyping a combat system. Next is the status effects. The status effects are as follows, and each has 4 values tied to it as shown here. And I made data tables to hold values for each one. I then put everything in a map variable type akin to the stats maps, and by so doing it like this, I can grab whatever I need at any time I wanted. So let's go through the logic. I first check if any status needs to be built up on a simple Boolean check. If the answer to any of these is yes, then we enter that function. We get the corresponding status and plug everything into the handle status. The handle status is extremely modular and works at building up or cooling down any status. It doesn't do damage, just increasing and decreasing. Afterwards, I update the status map and check if the status bars should be visible or not. To test these out, I made a status zone where a designer can choose which status to build up. These zones are, again, fully modular and allow any designer to just pick one and go with it. The checks are done on tick, so the designer has to do nothing else but this. If a player is afflicted by any status effect, they will receive the gameplay tag for it, and another series of checks will begin. These gameplay tags are made in the project settings, really simple stuff. These basically check for the tag, another set of Boolean checks, and then run the calculations accordingly. The reason why I keep saying Boolean checks is because it's not hard on performance for that reason. Doing a lot of integer checks or a lot of complex calculations would be really hard on performance and really tank the frame rate. Here, we don't have to do any of that. So now that we have everything that can basically affect the player, the next thing to do is to make the site of grace. For this, there are two parts. The first part is the basic site of grace. This is the simple part actually, is to remove all debuffs, get rid of all status effects, replenish all the stats, and then to be able to level up. Resetting the player was a simple part. To level up, I created a quick widget, and in that blueprint I had an input where the player could level up if the necessary amount of runes was met. This was again something that is consistent throughout the game across all classes. So I just made a map variable and stored the required runes to level up the values there, and a map variable. Here I can also do something like a scaling calculation, but a map variable was very simple, so I just used that one. The second part is a roundtable hold. Here is the one extra thing to do, boss selection. As I store the boss in the game instance, selecting the boss is not particularly hard because my setup was done properly. The only part where this comes into play is the final boss fight, and like I said before, this will load in something at the very end of the game, which is the final boss maps, and depending on that. After selecting that, we can load into the game, and it works! It does take a second to load up everything because it is an open world map and there's a lot to render here. Lastly, there are some extra stuff I also added, and this goes to the second part of the extra. I talked about the basic interaction system before, but I can also talk about the flasks that I made. Healing flasks is very important in Souls games, with Elden Ring and Elden Ring Nightreign being no different. The game starts the player out with 3 flasks, so I did that too. However, flasks can be upgraded at churches, so I made sure to add that interactable as well. Most of these are determined by the buildings surrounding it, like this church right here. I can tell it's a church because of what the church looks like. So I'll eventually have to add buildings to it and art, but for now, this is the product without any art actually being in the project. Again, for modularity. Even though I have all the static meshes from the project here, other add-ons and plugins I use was the amazing Ultra Dynamic Sky. Truly amazing asset pack. I would recommend anyone who can get this to actually get it. Everything is so vibrant and makes everything shine so well and organized. I also have the Electric Nodes plugin. This is really nice for keeping stuff organized, but you can also mess with your lines and nodes in the project settings. With this in mind, here is the actual storm that the player has to avoid and escape. And by escape, I really just mean not get caught in it. Akin to Fortnite, this is really simple. As the day progresses, the storm gets bigger and bigger, and the traversal area gets smaller and smaller. And so all I have to do here is balance out the storm with the actual rate of change of the time of day used in the Ultra Dynamic Sky. Ultra Dynamic Sky is really good for this purpose. If I were to code the sky myself, I would go through a bunch of more calculations, something I really don't want to do, and probably put that on the level blueprint, which isn't a good thing either, since that reduces modularity. Hence, having Ultra Dynamic Sky increases my modularity, even though I technically didn't make Ultra Dynamic Sky myself. Now, with all this in mind, there are obviously ways we can actually improve this. A lot of the functionality comes from the iterative processes. This means that there's a lot of redundant code in this project, and it's not well optimized. Another issue this project has is the obvious scope. This boils down to how much I'm willing to do, but this game is huge. It's not a joke on how much effort this game requires. And it makes sense. It's a AAA game made by From Software. They love to go deep. Rethinking the scope to make it more manageable will be the best case for me. And this is especially true when I get into things like the talismans, relics, tools, items, and more. I started to making these mechanics as a way to boost myself up for the next iterative process and the next iteration. However, there's a lot here, and I don't know if I can actually make all these truly and fully functional. Regardless of those flaws, I'm extremely proud of this project. In the future, I hope to get the basics of inventory, the relic system, and the talismans done. This will improve the overall game feel by bringing a much needed balance to the game. This is why I love making these games. I love taking a really complex design and bringing it to life. I'm not a programmer, so I may not be able to bring everything to life, but I can make the ideas and prototypes really, really well, make them modular enough where I can still improve on these in the future if needed. Again, the design was already made, so making it is fairly simple for me. However, the designing of it is truly amazing, and I'm gonna love breaking this game down as I have in the past, even more so for the relic system. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video where I talk about the next iterative process and obviously break down this game even more and its base mechanics. Thank you guys so much. See you around.